Well, thanks for joining us for another Talk About It Tuesday. If you caught some of our earlier series, you'll recognize Dr. Sean Smitham. He's here with us again today. It's all Deacon Band from Band Construction. Really want to get more practical in our discussion, not just what does it look like to identify maybe some pitfalls in our own mental health, self-evaluate, be able to care for others, and thinking through all of that. There's some great content for you to go check that out, but we want to get a little bit more practical in what it looks like in a workplace for you, Deacon, as a business owner. There are some unique pressures and challenges, so we want to talk about that, as well as really creating a culture where mental health is something that we can break down that stigma, where we can talk about it, where it's okay to admit and talk about issues surrounding mental health, and really, especially in our construction industry, right? That's a really important piece. So, Dr. Smitham, if you would introduce yourself briefly, we'll get to Deacon and jump into our conversation.
Sure. I'm Dr. Sean Smitham. I'm a clinical psychologist here in Spokane.
And my name is Deacon Band. I run a construction company, remodeling company here in Spokane.
Yeah, so on that topic, Deacon, talk to us a little bit about, really this past year has been probably a lot of different new challenges, different pressures as a business owner. What does that look like for you, whether that's for you personally or just as a business owner, when you think about mental health and just your own experience? What has that been like this last year?
You know, last year I would describe as busy uncertainty, in that we have, the economy has been expanding for a number of years for the construction industry, and that's our busyness. But as we've dealt with the COVID-19 issues and some of the other economic issues, that's been a lot of uncertainty. It's created a lot of uncertainty for us as the management. And then, of course, that just rolls right down into the field, where we go from maybe somebody, the overarching look that I get of everything, and I have a little bit of knowledge on everything, that I feel maybe I have some comfort level, and then that has to be translated through to our entire crew and our customers, really, of here is what we see, here is our plan, here's what we're going to do about it, and then be able to kind of bob and weave throughout the year. We had, like a lot of industries, we were closed down for a number of weeks that grew into a month and change. We were able to turn that back around. We worked with our employees to inform them constantly of here's what we're doing, here's what's coming, here's how we're going to deal with it. We were able to, I think, put together a very, very quality, informative, and supportive system to keep all of our employees happy, safe, and economically secure. And that's it's really an issue that in construction there's some ebb and flow, but this one was a little different, right? It was very much out of our control, but we did a pretty decent job with it, I think. And when it was time to go back to work, our employees were very happy to come back to work. I do believe that has to do with the culture of our company and the communication that we have with each other, kind of all the way through, management into laborers, and the difference just in like everyone's kind of paycheck, if you will, of seeing things out a little further versus we had a couple employees that we hired that had just moved into town and were quite literally living out of a vehicle, one of them, and we're able to put that all together and support that individual and provide a good projection of how their future might look. Very interesting.
Dr. Smitham, Sean, if I can.
Yeah.
I saw you perk up a little bit when he said busy uncertainty.
Yeah.
So unpack that a little bit from your vantage point. And then I know too, in our earlier sessions, we're talking about safety, predictability, some of these markers that just as people we look for to have a stable mental health. So busy uncertainty. Yeah. How does that hit you? And then maybe
I think it's a great summary, right? So And I think a lot of what you were saying, I was sitting here nodding because it was all the right things from a mental health standpoint. And so human beings don't do well with uncertainty. And so when we're in times where there's uncertainty, when we can over communicate, and not just communicate, not just be the cheerleader, everything's going to be okay, because people know at their core that you don't have control over some of that stuff. So I think what I was really excited to hear you talk about was we talked to all the stakeholders, everybody down the line in terms of our employees, but also our customers. And we let them know that this is what we're seeing and here's our plan moving forward. And then as things cropped up, it sounds like you had a great mechanism for communicating that. So human beings do really well when we can socially manage anxiety. Human beings don't do well when we're isolated in that anxiety. So when we have that uncertainty and we're isolated in that anxiety, human beings do not do well under those conditions. But under conditions of busy uncertainty, if there's a way of communicating, here's what we're seeing, here's all the variables we've identified, here's the ones we haven't, but here's our plan for what we're going to do with that, then human beings can do fairly well. And it sounds like your company weathered the storm because of that leadership very well. So I was excited to hear all those pieces that you had in place.
I think one of the things that, interestingly, contractors, builders, there's a lot of your professional career is about creating a plan, right? Seeing a problem, seeing potential, creating a plan, working towards it. Talk maybe a little bit, because I think that's a little bit unique to our industry, and I think maybe something that can help business owners and people in construction to think about mental health that same way. But talk about that when there's busy uncertainty, and you know that to have some stability and certainty, you need to create a plan. What does that process look like for you, whether it's personal or even with business, and how can you maybe apply some of those principles to creating a healthy mental health environment in a workplace?
Sure. I guess you would approach a lot of things. I tend to be a problem solver, and that look at, okay, number one, is this a problem or not? And of course it was a problem. So with that, okay, what are some of the things that we can identify as tools to solve the problem? What are our intended outcomes, and then how are we going to take action in order to put those together? For us, it was a lot of reaching out to our network of people that we've worked with for years and relationships that we've created to see what are options, how are we going to deal with, for example, when we were closed down, how are we going to deal with unemployment, right? We were fully prepared to just pay everyone's paychecks as long as we needed to. We were prepared to do that, but we immediately reached out to a consulting firm. We did a lot of research on our own, reach out to our accountant, other business owners, and we're able to put together a really nice plan to at least handle that in the short term of making sure that our employees aren't going to not be able to feed their families. I mean, it was really that basic at that time. And then it was further on, okay, well then this is going to last a little while. How do we continue on that path? But overall, it's using the network, getting the information together, and then trying to make the best decision that we could to benefit our people with the information that we had. And in that whole process, communicating with our employees as to what we're doing constantly. This is what we're looking at. What do you guys think about that? How is this going to affect you? And then projecting timelines for them and other things, just information. Look, here's what we're working on. Here's the information. Tell us how you feel about it. And then make quick decisions on, with the best knowledge that we can. It would be really cool, I think, at some point to go back and kind of line that out, because it's somewhat of a crisis plan that we didn't have, that we in effect created reactionary, but we did it.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned I thought was really interesting, and Dr. Smith, if you can touch on this. For me, one of the things I think I've realized strongly over the last year, and I think we probably all have, is that relationship is important. That is, as nice as sometimes, being alone with some peace and quiet sounds really good, and the most introverted of individuals will feel that way quite often. But even for people who are very, very introverted, we need relationship. We need people. So talk about kind of that dynamic, how relationships play into mental health.
Yeah. So if you'll, so the interesting thing is when we talk about our minds, the hardware, if you will, that we're dealing with as human beings, we actually have three brains in one, and they're stacked on top of each other. And so if you use your hand here, we can go through a rough model of it. The fleshy part of my hand here would represent what we call the reptile brain. Now, the reptile brain is everything we need to survive. It's hardwired for our survival. So things like temperature control, appetite, those type of things, but also our basic sort of emotions, fight, flight, or freeze responses are coordinated by that part of the brain. So that's what we call the reptile brain. In human beings, the second part of our brain that evolved sits right in the middle of the brain. And if I fold my thumb in like this, it represents the middle part of our brain. So you'll hear the term midbrain or limbic brain. So that part of the brain, by and large, is responsible for relationships, emotions, and memory. Now, that part of the brain has some interesting features. It doesn't distinguish real from imagined very well, and it doesn't really distinguish time very well. So when we talk about trauma lives in the middle part of the brain. But then we have this part of the brain where for human beings, so if I fold my fingers over like this, the brain would be sitting in my skull with the knuckles forward. My fingers then represent the most advanced part of our brain, which is human beings we identify with. And this is the seat of language, logic, reason, complex thought. But here's the interesting thing. So whenever there's a conflict between a more recent part of the brain and a more ancient part of the brain, the more ancient one always wins. So when we get to the point where our emotions have kicked into high gear, where we have really high fight or flight responses, when I teach this to kids, what I say is we flip our lid. The more advanced part of our brain gets kicked into the back seat. It continues to run commentary, but it's no longer at the controls. The one that steps up to grab the controls is the more primitive part of our brain. The reason I go through that explanation is in situations where crisis, one of the most reliable ways that we can get ourselves to calm down and soothe others down is first to connect with them relationship-wise. So we reach out to our contacts and we let them know, like, hey, this is going on. I'm really freaking out about this. How about you? How can I help you? How can you help me? And that kind of relationship building helps the brain start to integrate again. And then what we'll start to see is then we can become much more creative problem solvers, because now we've activated this network where we're not just trying to do things in isolation. And for me, I always come back to this hand model because you can almost see it happen. It's hard to see it happen when it's happening to you, but you can almost watch it happen. And if you have kids, you can watch it happen in real time, where they flip their lid and they're just like the primitive part of the brain is going. But then if we can connect with them, we come alongside them and just start to share information. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm hearing. And then they start to connect, and then the brain sort of comes down. And what's great about the way that you were talking about your organization is that is essentially what we did through the crisis. And I really like the way that you said, at some point, we're going to have to go back and take a look at what we did, because as human beings, that's how we grow. So we're always just trying to navigate with the best information that we have, but then afterwards, when we go back and we kind of take a look at it, say, oh, this is where we made a really good decision here, or here's where we could have made a different decision. That's where the growth opportunities are for the business and then for individuals as well.
Right. Well, thank you, Dr. Smitham. Deacon Band, Band Construction, thanks for joining us as well. We're going to put a brief pause in this conversation. We'll come back for part 2. This is part 1. Thanks for joining us. Talk about it Tuesday with the Spokane Home Builders Association. Check out the links available to you to learn more. If you need to reach out for help, we want these resources available to you. And make sure you check in for the next session.